I'm currently on holiday here in the UK, which is why I'm filming in my father-in-law's garage. But still, over here in the UK, Andy Barnum has just become the new UK Prime Minister. And as he's come into office, he's got a whole host of tax reforms that he'd like to put into place. And one of them piqued my interest. That's stamp duty. Now, every economist, and I'm pretty sure anybody that has recently bought a property in Australia would agree that we should get rid of this tax. But today I want to explore, should the UK change it and whether or not Australia should follow suit. So, what is stamp duty and why is it so controversial? To understand stamp duty, we need to go back more than 330 years. It's the year 1694. England is at war with France and the government is running out of money fast. So King William III introduces what's supposed to be a temporary tax to help pay for the war. It's only meant to be in place for 4 years. Any important document, like a contract, a license, or even a newspaper, needed an official government stamp to be legally valid. It was brilliantly simple, easy to enforce, and almost impossible to avoid. Governments realised that they'd stumbled on a money printing machine. The public, however, they hated it. Then in 1765, Britain made a costly mistake. It introduced the Stamp Act across its American colonies. The backlash was immediate and gave history one of its most famous political slogans. No taxation without representation. You've probably heard the phrase. And before long, Britain found itself fighting a revolution. It lost America, but it never gave up the tax. And in 1788, Britain established the colony of New South Wales, just 23 years later. And like so many British laws, stamp duty came along with it. Over the next 2 centuries, governments gradually abolished stamp duty on almost every type of legal document. Almost. Because there was one version that state governments simply couldn't let go. The tax on buying property. Which means a tax that was invented over 330 years ago to help fund a European war has become one of the biggest costs to buying a property in Australia today. But economists have been saying for decades that it's one of Australia's worst taxes. So why haven't governments abolished stamp duty on property like they did with legal documents? Well, it's not because governments think that it's a good tax. You see, state governments raised $139 billion in 2025, and of that, around $35 billion was raised through stamp duty. That's an average of around $61,000 on top of buying a home. And that number has exploded over recent years. To give you an example, stamp duty collected in 2019 was around $18 billion. And by 2022, that had jumped to a massive $35 billion. So as you can see, it raises billions of dollars each year for state governments, so you can understand why they wouldn't want to get rid of it. So why have economists and political commentators been saying for decades that it's one of Australia's worst taxes? Well, it comes down to one word, and that word is distortion. You see, a distortionary tax changes the behaviour of the people that adversely affects the economy. And stamp duty is a perfect example of that. Imagine, if you will, that instead of paying taxes on your income, you paid the government tens of thousands of dollars just to change jobs. How often do you think you'd stay in a role that was no longer suited to you? Well, that's kind of what stamp duty does to the property market. It taxes mobility. So empty nesters stay in homes that are far too big, young families can't upsize into a home that suits them, and workers can't relocate for better opportunities. It just stagnates the market. In 2022, the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute released a report that states that 7.4 million households live with more bedrooms than they need for a typical sleeping arrangement, which equates to about 13 million spare bedrooms. So maybe Australia's housing crisis isn't just about building more houses. Maybe it's also about making it easier for people to move into the homes we already have. So we've established that stamp duty needs to change, but what's the alternative? Well, this is where Andy Barnum in the UK come back into play. They're suggesting that we replace stamp duty with a broad-based land tax. So instead of paying tax when you purchase a property, you pay a smaller annual tax on the land underneath it. Many organisations all agree that it is a far more efficient way of raising revenue. But there's another advantage to a broad-based land tax that's far less talked about. It changes government incentives. Charlie Munger once said, "Show me your incentives, I'll show you your outcomes." Under stamp duty, state governments profit from a housing crisis. But under an annual land tax, state governments are strongly incentivised to invest in infrastructure, to unlock housing, to promote the productive use of land, and it shares in the value it creates. The problem isn't that we don't know how to design a better tax system. The problem is getting from today's system to a better one without leaving a multi-billion-dollar hole in state budgets. So I'll be watching the UK government closely to see if they can pull it off. Because a tax created for a 17th century war here in England, becoming one of the biggest costs to housing in 21st century Australia, well, that could be one of the biggest lessons of them all. Because the policies that governments put in place today to solve today's problems can end up shaping society for centuries.